Working out at home should not dictate whether you can progress or not, and working out at home does not need to prevent you from making the gains you want to see. So firstly, thank you for everybody who voted regarding the whole TFNL clothing situation that I posted about in the last video. That should be coming, if all goes well, beginning to mid-September. You'll see. I'm excited. Very limited supply, so I will pre-warn you, but I appreciate you, because without you, I wouldn't have this opportunity. So thank you. Pamela on the card. I haven't spoken about Pamela for a while, haven't spoken about home workouts too thoroughly for a while. We're going to talk about 15-minute booty shelf, lift your glutes, gym style, weight and booty band workout. A couple of things I want to point out here, and a couple of things I want to address, especially leading on from the last video, regarding how to actually really effectively build your glutes even at home. So we're going to cover that. Before we start the video, if at any point throughout this entire video you actually learn something from this video, then I would very much appreciate it if you did subscribe to the channel. But again, if you don't learn anything, don't worry about it. I'm useless. Starting off not too strong, seated good morning. I don't particularly like it, because essentially when you're looking at like a hip hinge pattern to really bring the glutes in, what you actually want to really focus on is actually just driving those hips back. But when you're in the seated position, you're just going forward, and that in itself is actually going to reduce how much load is going through the glutes, actually place a little bit more load on the lower back, and that's kind of what you want to avoid. When you have the band in here, where you've obviously got the abductor pulses and whatnot, that's essentially going to really fatigue the glutes just from essentially going through that constant tension movement, but it doesn't really mean it's effective. And sadly, when you do movements like that, it can actually mask the effectiveness of movements, because your glutes are now tired. You're going to think preceding movements are harder or more effective for the glutes because they're really pre-fatigued, when in reality, you're hurting it, but you're not working it effectively. So what I would say, if you are going to do like a good morning variation, fantastic variation, I love it, hip hinges, great. Stand up and kick your bum back. Honestly, that's a big thing. When you are just tipping forward and back, you're really actually holding your glute gains back, and as someone with a very small bottom, you don't want to do that. See, things like this, yeah, I guess they do have some place, because again, it is a unilateral pattern where it can be very similar to like a split squat, somewhat similar to a lunge, or a pattern of sorts, and you are working in a slightly different plane of motion with this obviously lateral movement here and there, which I actually respect. What I would say is just having the bands around your knees probably isn't going to be enough. What you do want to do, if you are doing this, like we're seeing here, is actually implement some weight. The issue with having the weight up here is it becomes an anterior loaded movement, and a lot of people may find their shoulders give out first, their arms give out first, or maybe even their core gives out first, which then in turn actually takes a bit of emphasis away from the glutes. You may find it a bit nice actually holding two dumbbells kind of up here towards more of the center point of the body rather than in front of you, but I do understand when you're at home you are a bit limited. To be honest, you actually may find it a bit nicer if you hold the dumbbells down by your side and actually just use straps to eliminate the grip issue you may be facing, because the biomechanics of the movement will still be the same, you're just loading it slightly differently. So again, movements like this are fair. I just would really focus on the key thing, which is actually make sure you're lifting heavy enough. I had a few comments in previous videos saying the best way to build your glutes is XYZ, and I will tell you, the best way to build your glutes is, firstly, there is no best way to build your glutes, but if you really want to build your glutes effectively at home, at the gym, it doesn't matter. I preach this so often, and I dare you just to try it. Get stronger. Whatever movements you do the same movements each week. Stick to a program and get really bloody strong. So be that squat patterns like this, whatever you're choosing to, even if they're not the most effective movements, even if they're movements I've said I don't like, but you do like them, get really strong at them. In doing so, make sure you're training hard enough and just trying to lift more weight or do more reps each week. And over time, I guarantee your bottom will start ballooning. And if there's one thing we want here, it's a balloon bottom. Is it? Is that what we want? And the thing is, when you're doing like these kind of slow squat variations, which we do often see at home, sure, I get it. When you're at home, you're a bit limited, so you may slow down movements and make them harder. You would actually probably see more benefit doing it faster. And what I mean by that is research kind of suggests that like whether you're doing a 2-second eccentric or an 8-second eccentric, it doesn't provide any more or less stimulus for hypertrophy. So we know the eccentric to an extent is only so important. But then when you look at the concentric, so the way up of a squat, people obviously say, oh, time under tension, you want to slow the movement down so you can really feel the muscles. Sure, slowing it down, you may feel the muscles more, but just because you feel it more doesn't necessarily mean that's better for you. So there's this big idea that sensation correlates to effectiveness of movement, but that's actually just not the case. And as you get stronger and start lifting more weight, you actually start losing that sensation slightly, and you may almost find it harder to really focus on that mind-muscle connection. And quite frankly, I think mind-muscle connection is heavily overvalued, and in reality doesn't have as much place in your workout as you think it does. And the way I kind of to justify it is kind of like this. And I kind of spoke about this in the comment section of the last video. Is let's say you do a bicep curl, for example. So you're going through this elbow flexion. So you're bending the elbow. Whether I can feel my biceps or not does not change the fact that my biceps are the primary movers of that movement. And without them, my elbow wouldn't bend. Then people say, oh, I only bicep curl light because I really want to feel it. The weight does not change the biomechanics of the movement. So if your biceps are responsible for this, whether I'm lifting light or lifting heavy, my biceps are still responsible for this. The only difference is if I'm lifting heavy and actually training hard enough, strength is relative, so when I say heavy, what I actually mean is just a weight that's heavy enough to take you within close proximity of failure. Although lifting heavier, I may not feel it as much. Biomechanically, my biceps still have to do this action, and if I'm actually lifting heavier and closer to failure, they're working harder, even though I may not feel them more, which is why I always preach to people, get strong. The weight you're lifting does not change biomechanics of movement. When it comes to what's going to yield the most growth and response when it comes to building muscle, feeling is not going to be as important as proximity to failure. And when you slow movements down through the concentric portion, as we saw with the squat pattern, like I said, sure, you'll feel it more, but it doesn't mean you'll make it more effective. Honestly, they've actually looked at hypertrophy stimulus and motor unit recruitment, and they've basically found the involuntary slowing of contractile velocity is what's going to drive the most motor unit recruitment. And that's going to be pretty bloody important when you look at building muscle. And what I mean by involuntary slowing of contractile velocity is that as you come up and contract and go through the concentric portion of a rep, you want to go as fast as you can. Over time, as you get closer to failure, despite trying to go super fast, you're slowing down and actually going quite slowly involuntarily. And that's when you know, firstly, you're probably, hopefully, within close proximity of failure. And two, motor unit recruitment is looking bloody splendid. And that's going to help you grow. Link down below in the description, you have a few things. You've got the link to work with myself on a one-to-one online coaching basis where I can coach you towards your goals, whatever they may be and wherever you may be in the world. You've also got the link to join the TFNL group coaching, which for less than $1 a day, you can follow a pretty bloody spicy program written by me and also talk to me in the message board as well as the other team members. And that's at home or at the gym. Or you've also got the links to the TFNL workout guides, which not only tell you what to do, they also tell you why you should do it and show you how to do it too with a full exercise library. If any of those options tickle your pickle, have a gander down below in the description and see what's occurring. The thing is, I've noticed this a lot with Pamela's booty workouts before, is that there's a lot of abduction-based movements. And these abduction-based movements are kind of tricky because there's also the argument that firstly, they are very sensation-driven. So a lot of the movements are actually quite short and position dominant, which means they're probably going to yield a really good squeeze and pinch, which makes you feel like they're working a lot. But again, we've kind of just spoken about sensation and how it may not necessarily correlate to effectiveness. But the other thing is when you do some like seated abduction movements, where we saw when she was seated and doing this, a lot of people actually complain that it can upset their piriformis and it can actually trigger things like sciatica, likely due to inflammation of the piriformis, which could come down to piriformis syndrome. So what I would just say is be wary. Not for everyone. Some people love it. If you love it, it works for you, fantastic, go for it. But I'm saying you probably don't need to do it. And if it upsets you, causes sciatica or upsets your bottom through the piriformis, probably not worth it. Crab walk is another tricky one because again, I see this all the time. People use this as like a pre-glute activation movement, when in reality, because you're maintaining this kind of like half tense position, your glute's going to be really bloody on fire because they're actually not resting. They're under constant tension for a significant period of time, but they're not really going through a sufficient range of motion, which means they're essentially just contracting for a while, isn't necessarily going to be the best for building muscle. When it does come to building muscle at home, honestly, I will really simplify it as much as I can. I'd really focus on acquiring some weights if you can, be that bands, dumbbells, even a barbell if possible, and maybe a hip thrust pad. I'd focus on things like RDLs, fantastic movement. I focus on hip thrust or unilateral hip thrust, just because again, if you are limited to weight, you may find that doing movements unilaterally, so one side at a time, means that that weight limitation becomes less of a limitation because you're only doing one side at a time, therefore you're going to lift less anyway. You could look at a banded kickback variation, and you also look at things like lunges, walking lunges, fantastic, split squat variations, reverse lunges, things along those lines. Just because you're training at home doesn't mean you shouldn't adopt similar movements as if you were training at the gym. You just have to adjust them and accommodate for what you have. And if you are limited to X number of weight, do more reps. Honestly, I'll say it's the best thing you can do. Although my preferred rep range is usually 5 to 10 for most things, what I do say is we know that doing 5 reps and 30 reps to failure will yield a very similar stimulus when it comes to hypertrophy. So if you know the weights you have are too light to stay within, let's say, 5 to 10 reps, but you could probably get 20 reps of them at failure, fantastic, do more reps. Granted, higher reps may yield greater fatigue, but that's okay. Working out at home should not dictate whether you can progress or not, and working out at home does not need to prevent you from making the gains you want to see, especially bubble bottom gains. Oh wait, no, balloon bottom gains, that's what it was. And things, I'm not digging at Pamela here at all, because quite frankly, a lot of her videos are home workout based, and there's only so much you can do. Pamela probably, I assume, understands that an effective program is one that probably doesn't change very much, but effective content is not repetitive, and to create content worthy of clicking, she probably needs to spice things up a bit and provide variety, because she's an instructor in this case, where she's showing you things to do. She's not necessarily an educator, whereas I'm sure if she were shifting focus to education, she'd probably say to you, do these simple movements and just do them for a long time and get stronger at them. You'll see amazing results. But where would she go from there? It's not very good for marketing, you see. So I'm not digging at her whatsoever. I'm just taking what she's showing, giving my opinion, saying, you know what, this is okay. Maybe do this a bit differently, or maybe just do X, Y, Z and run with that to see what happens. Just like all my videos, this is simply my opinion. And not only should you form your own opinion, you should also find out what works best for you through trial and error. The best program for you is the one you can remain most consistent with, even if it doesn't align with science, even if it's quote unquote not optimal. If it's something you can remain consistent with and it allows sustainability and it's helping you achieve results, it's probably a pretty good program for you. That is it. That is the video. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my balloon bottom waffle, and thank you for tolerating the video.